Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a theological concept that you've likely heard called Biblical Patriarchy or male headship. We're going to break down the argument for it step by step based entirely on our source materials. So we're going to look at this in 4 parts. First, the foundation everything is built on. Then the specific structure that's proposed. After that, how it's applied to marriage. And finally, what proponents say it's all for. All right, let's start at the very beginning, at the foundation, because according to the sources we're looking at, everything else we're about to discuss, well, it all stands or falls on this one single idea. It really all comes down to this one question. The entire argument for this viewpoint kicks off with a very specific belief about the Bible, that it's infallible, meaning it's without error, and that it's the final ultimate authority. If you don't start from that position, none of the other pieces really fit together in this framework. And proponents of this view will point to verses just like this one to make their case. The idea here isn't that the Bible is just a good guide. It's the only standard for everything in life and faith. If something is wrong, Scripture is seen as the only tool you need to make it right. So, if the Bible is the unchanging blueprint, what kind of structure does it actually build? Well, that brings us to the hierarchy it proposes for the family and the church. And this is a structure that's presented not as a cultural leftover, but as a deliberate divine design. Now, before we go any further, we have to get the definition right. The sources are really clear about this. They define biblical patriarchy not as a system where men dominate women, but as a God-designed structure, one that's intended to bring order and clarity with the ultimate goal of helping everyone flourish. This verse you're seeing from 1 Corinthians, this is the cornerstone. It's presented as the key text, the one that lays out a very clear chain of authority. You could say it's the linchpin for the entire structure that follows. And here's how that verse gets mapped out. It's seen as this clear downward flow of authority. Now, the key argument here isn't about power struggles. It's meant to be a blueprint for order. And where does this idea come from? Well, the argument traces this hierarchy all the way back to the very beginning, to the creation account in the book of Genesis. So it's viewed as a timeless principle, not some later invention. According to this framework, the Apostle Paul is actually using that sequence of creation, Adam being formed first, as the very basis for why there are different roles within the church and the home. Okay, so we have this divine hierarchy, but how does that actually apply to the relationship between a husband and a wife? Well, the source material points to a really powerful metaphor for this. This passage right here is absolutely central. It draws a direct parallel. It says that the relationship between a husband and wife is meant to be a living, breathing picture of the relationship between Christ and the church. So the crucial point here is that these roles are seen as 2 sides of the same coin. They're parallel and they're complementary. Each person has a very distinct, Christ-centered responsibility. It's presented as a model of mutual service, just expressed in different ways. What's really interesting is how specific the source materials get in defining what headship is supposed to look like. It's defined by selfless sacrifice, by protection, and by provision. It's framed as a leadership model, not tyranny. And in fact, it's explicitly positioned as a direct counter to what our culture might call toxic masculinity. All right, so we have the foundation and the structure, but why? What's the ultimate goal of all this? Well, the argument is that a biblically ordered family is meant to have a purpose that goes far beyond its own 4 walls. In this framework, the family is seen as the single most important building block for both society and the church. It's presented as the first and most critical vehicle for spreading God's kingdom on earth. So, the home becomes the central hub for discipleship, for teaching the faith and passing it down. It's where you're meant to fulfill the Great Commission, that core instruction to spread the faith, starting right at home. It's seen as a defense against a decline in society's spiritual health. This table really sums it up nicely. It shows how the family's internal health is supposed to fuel its external mission. The inward strength and unity, they aren't just for the family's own good. They're seen as the engine for making an impact on the world. So, to bring it all home, what's the big picture? The purpose of sticking to this structure is to create stable families that serve as a living testimony to the gospel. It's meant to be like a billboard showing a spiritual reality to a watching world. So, the core argument we've explored today is that the path forward for society actually lies in returning to these foundational, ancient principles.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative question to think about.